So hello everyone, thank you all for joining today. This is lesson 4 for Software Saturdays. As again, if you're watching along at home or watching it right now, please fill out the attendance form you see on screen. And as always, join us on Slack. So Software Saturdays lesson 4. This week will be about basic ReactJS. So we are reaching into the little end part, you can call it, of our kind of curriculum. So we've done all the basic web development stuff up to this point. These next 2 weeks will be all about ReactJS. And ReactJS is what the class is all about. It's a very popular JavaScript framework that we use quite a bit in the actual industry. So as a quick review of the semester, the 7-week course, we're on week 4 here. There are 3 more sessions left. 1 more about intermediate ReactJS next week, and then the last 2 weeks will be project days. I will have more info for everyone about the project next week, and then you guys can come on project day 1 or project day 2. Nothing new will be taught on those 2 days. You'll just be getting questions answered for your project, working on it. I want everyone to try to get it done so that everyone can get their certificate showing that they've completed the program by the College of Engineering. And other help resources, we have these weekly sessions every Saturday. We also record them and post them on the Slack and email them out every Sunday, give or take a few hours. And don't forget, guys, every Thursday from 6 to 7, we do hold virtual office hours. So if you do have any questions, please stop by, get some help, get questions answered, get things clarified, whatever it may be. And then, of course, Slack every day. Someone's checking that pretty much every day. While you're on the call right now, you have any questions for us, put them in the WebEx chat. Please make sure your send to drop-down box says all participants so that everyone, including me and the other attendees, can see your messages and get, make sure everyone's getting their questions answered. And like always, if you don't have one already, please open up a text editor. I have a link to VS Code there in case you want to get VS Code. And then as always, our demo files and examples are on GitHub. So if we take a quick look at GitHub right now, I want to show some stuff off there. So here's the GitHub that is currently set up for lesson 4. The lesson 4 folder all set up. This is a starter code, meaning if you want to follow along at home or some other time and you don't want to set up all the files yourself, you can use this. I highly recommend you look through the starter code, look through the SRC folder, and look at what all these files are doing. There's quite a few more compared to last week, so I want to make sure everyone is on the same page there. And you can either, if you're familiar with Git, clone this and try to do it yourself, or just kind of copy it, open it up and then kind of highlight in Control-C, Control-V it. If you do want to do it from home using Git, please read the README at the bottom. It will make your life so much easier. And if you're feeling a little bit adventurous and want to look ahead, in the little branch, the little drop-down box in the very top, the lesson 4 branch is updated with all of the full code for all the demos we'll be going over today during class. All right, given that, let's start up. So like last week, because we're moving into React, we will need to install and use Node.js and NPM. So if you haven't, I think most people have from last week, please install Node.js and NPM. The link to do so is right there. And if you have from last week, it is good to go. You are ready to go. Okay, so what I want to do today is not jump into new material like we have in the past couple of weeks. So I think it's a good thing to stop and take a few minutes to just review everything. Because we have covered quite a bit of kind of complex material, and I want to make sure everyone has gotten the best understanding of that material, since it does build upon what we do from now on to the project. So week 1 with HTML and CSS. So like I said the very first week, HTML is the foundation of the web. It is made up of opening and closing tags, and these tags can create blocks of elements that define the layout and the look of a certain page. Further, CSS is a way to style HTML. Plain old HTML is pretty boring. It's just black and white text in a very basic manner. But we can use CSS to make our page do almost anything, look very cool, have all these different properties and selectors, And we can style almost everything on a HTML page using some CSS. JavaScript review. So week 2 was all about JavaScript. JavaScript is very similar to C or Python. There's a little bit of both in there. Has a syntax of C with the variables and typing of Python. Variables have no type, but they have to be defined with either a let or a const. Remember, if your variable won't change, like most JSX, please use const. It'll make your bugs a lot less and make your life so much easier in the long run. But if your variable might ever change, I highly recommend you please use let. Never ever use var. We covered early on because there are a lot of problems that var introduces that we don't want to get into and cause bugs in our programs. We can use JavaScript to make HTML more interactive and dynamic. And we can respond to user interaction and change the HTML or the CSS. Lastly, last week, week 3, we introduced JSX. And JSX is used to define HTML inside of JavaScript. We can create reusable custom HTML tags and is the foundation of ReactJS. And we'll show that off in a little bit today. And just like any other HTML tag, we can style these JSX with CSS by importing the CSS file. So if you have any kind of further explanations, please look at the slides or the recording for these past 3 sessions. But are there any immediate questions about ReactJS or about JSX or HTML or JavaScript that you guys want me to go over before we jump into React stuff today? Okay, I do not see any questions, so let's jump into our topic for today. ReactJS. So ReactJS is defined as a front-end JavaScript framework, which basically means that ReactJS can be used to create dynamic and modular web pages using JavaScript. It's used and created mostly by Facebook, but a lot of other companies use React, including Twitter, Netflix, the New York Times, Tesla, the BBC, amongst a whole bunch. So it's not just tech companies, it's almost everybody. And it's mainly because React is easy to use and easy to maintain. So it's a really good choice for companies who want a user interface that looks good, is easy to write, and can be adapted to whatever needs they may have. So basic ReactJS syntax. So we kind of briefly went over this last week with the JSX stuff, but we mostly follow JavaScript rules. But the only difference in ReactJS is the main file, which is for most people going to be index.js, needs the last line to be react.dom.render. And this must be at the end to work properly. This will always, on our starter code, be included by default. So please remember to always look at that file. If it has the line at the very bottom, your code is React ready. If it doesn't, you may have to look for other, what may be going on. Inside of React components. So this is where it kind of is confusing. Previously, when we were doing JSX, I called each of those custom files we made, right? We could use a custom HTML tags in the main file. I called them my custom HTML or custom JSX. In reality, they're actually called custom React components. And you can tell that because if we open up our Visual Studio Code here and open up a component, so here's a demo, we'll go into the demo here in a little bit. The very first line of this demo, you'll see, says import React from React, and then this extends React component. Whoop, that's not right. Extends React components. That tells us that this is a React component or equivalent to custom JSX. So if you ever see custom JSX, just think it's basically a React component, but like a simpler version. And the template we give you will do all of this work for you. You do not have to worry about anything like render functions or importing things. If you look at the GitHub code, which is right here, lesson 4, SRC, and then components, The component.js file you can see here has very good starting code, a good template, you can think of it like, to begin writing custom React components. So if you do, please copy this template. It'll make your life so much easier. So here's some quick basic syntax more. By convention, all of the code you want to write has to go inside of the capital A app.js file or other component files. Again, components are just kind of like custom JSX. They actually are the exact same thing. The one thing you should do is you should never modify index.js. Now, I know last week we did that quite a bit, but unfortunately that was because I wanted to show you guys the simpler way of doing things. The more proper industry way of doing things is by never modifying index.js and by convention only adding things to app.js. Basically what will happen is you will make each kind of part of your website a different component and you will lay out your website inside of the app folder. And I'll show that off in the demos. So what makes React different from JSX? Well, React just is an extension of JSX. We really take the ideas we learned last week and just adapt them to add some functionality and dynamic interactability to these elements. This includes things like passing properties, or what are called props, to React components to make each one a little bit different. The code for a React component can modify the web page depending upon what props or properties are given to it. If you've ever programmed before, you can kind of imagine props being like parameters in a function. They are similar, but not exactly a good parallel, but they're kind of the same thing, where the parameters can modify how the function, or in this case, the props can modify how a component actually does anything. So you can change how it looks, change the text, whatever it may be. And you can think of like how we did way back in JSX. If you put something in curly braces, you can change the text between like inside of an HTML JSX element. You can use props to make sure that the component text is always changed to match the props. So let's just do a quick demo. Before that though, setting up a React project, please follow slide 15 from lesson 3. If you do not want to redo that process, you can reuse your code from last week. I just ask you, please make sure you copy and paste all of the template code we gave you from the GitHub into your text editor. That will make the process a lot easier for you to follow along when I show the different files and all that stuff. So it's time for demo number 1. Pull up VS Code. All right, so here's my VS Code. Again, it's straight from the GitHub, so it's all there if you want me to go over that. Now we're going to go into the index.js file here. So this is the index.js file. Like I said, never, ever modify this file. This file is created by default and created perfectly so that our code will work with just what you need for the code to work properly. If you want to add stuff to this file, do be aware we cannot guarantee if the code will work properly. By convention, the only code you should be modifying is in this new file in the same src folder. You can see that there called app.js. So I'll open that up. App.js is kind of like where you put all of the code you want your website to look at. So here actually is a blank app.js file. We'll look at a blank one here. Here's a template. You can see it looks very similar to the code I have open my VS Code, but the main difference is the actual comments gone, and it says type your website layout here. So the way React works is you make a custom component for a custom React component for each part of your website, and then you kind of like layer, like an HTML tag, like you would with HTML tags, you layer your website inside of app.js. So for example, I'm just going to, my bad, sorry. I'm just going to drag this down here to comment this up really quick. My layout is I have this main div here, I call it demos. Let me just save this really quick. And then I have demo 1 and demo 2 set up. So in demo 1, you can see I have two custom components called software and Saturdays. And these have a couple we'll call props. We'll get into that after that. And we lay them out in like a list. So it's always best to use a list to make sure your code, to use this kind of like, you organize a layout of your website using components so that you can change things out pretty quickly and see like an overview of how your site should look by just looking at the app.js file. So are there any questions right now about how to use app.js or index.js? Okay, I don't see any yet, but if you do, please put them in the Slack or in the WebEx. Again, make sure you choose all participants on the send to box. So let's look at some of these custom components I have. I have two set up for demo 1, software and Saturday. We'll open these up in different tabs here. So here is software. And you'll see at the top here looks very similar to the custom JSX we wrote last week. The difference being the render function, which was a lot simpler like it was last week. It's a little bit more complicated now. So inside of the render function, I have two variables called day of week and date. And as you can see, it says this.props.day and then this.props.date. So if you look back at the app.js and software, the tag looks a little bit different, right? You have the software, which is the name of the tag, you can see from up there. Then you have a day equals and a date equals. If you do like some kind of name or key it's called equals and then some kind of data after it, like you can see right here, whatever comes after the main component name, all this stuff over here, it's called props or properties. So this is kind of like the class or the ID or the on-click or the source kind of idea we covered in HTML. They're almost the exact same kind of thing, it's the idea of HTML properties. But these props or properties are not used to change the HTML, but rather used to change the React code. So remember that date is October 10th, which is today, and day is Saturday. So if you go into software, props is kind of just up here, but nothing. Look at the bottom here. This.props. This is telling us that from the props variable, find the day. The day we defined as Saturday. So day of week, or let day of week, will be equal to Saturday. And since this.props.date was October 10th, then let date should equal October 10th. Then we just have some JSX here on the bottom. Looks pretty normal. We just have today is, and then curly braces to change. Again, whatever in between curly braces is a JavaScript, valid JavaScript code, day of week and date. So if you run this code, it'll say in a p tag, today is Saturday, October 10th. We also have the same thing with this Saturday tag. The two props we're passing in are lesson number equal to 4 and software equal to ReactJS. This describes the current lesson. So we go to Saturday. We can see that we have two variables again, lesson and learning. Lesson is equal to this.props.lesson number, and learning is equal to this.props.software. So lesson will be 4 and learning will be ReactJS. One important thing to note here is the this.props. If you've ever used an object-oriented programming language before, like C++ or Python, Advanced Python, or Java, you're probably familiar with the this or the self that's used to define class variables. If you're not familiar with any of the languages, which this may be your first time using something like this, just think of when I say this.props, there are two kinds of variables. There are variables that exist within the function render and variables that exist within this class Saturday. So I'm going to hide the two here. If I say learning, like this plain old learning, or some plain old variable name, I'm talking about the variable name that exists only inside of the function. So this render in this case. But if I use the word this dot some variable name, I'm referring to the variable that exists inside of the entire class. This is a very confusing thing to get your head around, especially if you've never done OOP or object-oriented programming before. But just remember that for props, you're always going to say this dot props. Props will never just be a plain props. Again, if you're confused about that, please come to office hours and we'll make sure that you get that question answered. So back to the JSX, we just have some plain old div tag and some p tags. We just say it is week whatever and it's listen whatever. So it is time for us to run this code. Now there's only one way to do this code, using command line. So if you have a Windows computer, you can hit Windows key, open up command prompt. I'll pull it up here on this screen. If you do not have a Windows computer, if you have like a Mac, it's a terminal, it would be the exact same thing. Now there are a few tricky things you have to do. You have to find the directory, or the folder, it's called in regular OS, where this code is. So I know for a fact that I open up my File Explorer. Oh, it's in the wrong spot again, mind that. I open up my, this folder here. I look at the very top. I know that the file path is this file path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this file path, and on my command line I'm going to say cd, then I'm going to paste my file path. So I'll go there, and then I have to go into lesson 4. So let me say one more cd, lesson 4. cd just means change directory, and it's a way to change where your commands execute from. Some commands can only be run from certain folders. So you have to be careful when you're running command line. So I'll do that again, and now I'm in the folder I need to be in. So like last week we'll run npm start, and that'll run a server for us to test our code on. So we'll run it. Oh wait, my bad, I did that one thing real quick. It's a new computer for me, so everything's not popular, you guys. While that's running in the background, we'll do one quick more thing. Like last week, after you write your code in Software and Saturdays, you have to import the code. So if you look at the lines 2 and 3, import software and import Saturday, you have to choose the file where the code for your testing component is located. So import software from the component folder, which is up here, and then the software file. We have to do this because app is in the src folder, but this software and Saturdays are in the component folder, which is inside of the src folder. So we do the /component/software or /component/Saturday. You guys can change the name here, this folder, to whatever the folder name of your computer is, or the folder name of your folder is, and change the name here at the end to match the file name of whatever the file you may have is. Also remember that your file has to be uppercase. It does not like lowercase things. Done yet? It should be good now. npm Alright, it's loaded up. So we open up a web browser and let it load. It's a little bit slow, especially for a first time install. You will see it has the 4 p tags that we thought it would. So today is whatever, it is week 4, and we are learning about ReactJS. Just like how our code and our props did. Note that in these couple spots here, we changed it. It's not telling us the variable name. It's not saying today is day of week. It's saying today is Saturday, because we passed in Saturday as a prop. Are there any immediate questions about this demo while I still have it open? But using props to change your JSX. Okay, I do not see any at the moment, so we'll just launch back to our start real quick. Now it is time for checkpoint, our first checkpoint. So please look at the starter code and create a React project. Again, you can either clone the directory if you're familiar with how to do that, or you can just download the files or copy paste the files, whatever is easiest for you to understand. Once you do that, please write 2 custom components. Again, look at the template I gave you in the component folder and add them to app.js, pass some props and modify the code. If you're not sure how to do that, again, use the slides on Slack or ask a question in the Slack or the WebEx chat, choosing all participants. Okay, so let me pull everything back up here. Perfect. So here is the checkpoint. I think most people were able to get some form of it done. I know a lot of people weren't able to get it all finished. That's perfectly fine. We'll have plenty of more time to work on the checkpoints. Both checkpoints, just 2 more. They're kind of bullet point lists, so it's not too bad. But right now, I think we have to move on to the next couple topics. Only 1 or 2 more things we're going to cover. All right. So this is like one of the last new things we're going to cover today. It's called state. So there are 2 more things. This is the most important one. State is kind of like the name suggests, the internal state of a React component. State stores values that are specific only to that instance of a component. So when state changes, the component should also change. This is kind of similar to like local variables in a class, if you've ever taken OOP before. While it's similar to props in that they both store data, but the difference comes to props are like parameters. They can only be modified or set 1 time, whereas state are more like variables. We can change the state only by the component. We can change them as many times as we want. So by convention, you should always store your props inside of the state so that you can modify them if they need to be modified by some functions in your code. So again, think of state like how the code actually looks, the component actually works, whereas the props is like the initial state. It's kind of a good, I think, way to think about it. So we can both set and change state. So state we can change in the constructor. That's kind of like that really weird part we saw at the very top. It wasn't being used for anything. And we can use what's called a setstate function to add or modify state variables. Remember, the state can have whatever variables you want. It can have as few or as many. And this number of variables can be increased over time or even modify their values over time. So we can use a setstate function to allow React to change the state to change or to modify into what we want it to be. So that's kind of state. Again, it sounds a little bit complicated, but it's really not too bad. Now we're going to jump into demo 2 really quick. So I'm going to just comment out this part of demo 1. So if you no longer need demo 1, I'll keep it in. Why not keep it in there? And then I'll just drag you back down. Okay, so I have 2 new, let me save this. I have 2 new custom React components. One called Purdue and one called Boilermakers. Now if I open them up inside of here, we have Purdue and Boilermakers. Again, these are in the component folder. We'll look at Purdue first. I pass in 1 prop to Purdue, the year of 2019. So keep it in mind, it comes in handy in a second. Purdue here. So here is my code for the Purdue component. We'll look first at the constructor. Normally it's just left blank because we didn't use it before. But now we actually have to modify some of this code in here to actually make our state exist. So again, we say this.state. Again, if you're familiar with OOP, remember, state is a class variable, so we have to keep it inside of the class scope. But if you're not know what that means, just know that this.state is how you call state. You then can, in curly braces, kind of like a JSON object or JavaScript object we covered way back in week 2, you do what's called key values. So we have your key, semester, colon, and then your data or value. In this case, semester is fall, and year is equivalent to props.year. So what we're doing is inside of the state, we are storing the year, which is 2019, and the current semester, which is fall. This is again good practice. You should always store your props in your states so that you can modify the props or modify the initial state conditions if you need to modify them in your code. Then we have our render function, which looks pretty normal. We have some JSX here. Notice on this line, I defined my JSX with the word let instead of const. Now, I normally said we only want JSX to be a const, which never changes. But since, if you look at my code here, the JSX does change, we wanted this kind to actually be a let. But this is a very unique edge case. Most of the time, you would actually always use const. So what we do is a quick if statement here, and we say if this.state, again, we're calling to the state variable, and the year is equal to 2019, which it is, some JSX will become this regular old div here with two p tags. You can read them right here. It'll basically say, is it the past, and the current year is past. However, I'm going to add this key here. If I instead decide to say that some JSX is, this.state.year is not 2019, it's any other year except 2019, some JSX becomes, it is the semester of the current year. So what does that mean? If we look at, we save our code, and we go to our web browser, here, we'll see that the top two lines are, this is the top two lines are the top three lines are demo one, kind of ignore those lines. And then these bottom two lines are demos, like demo two, the Purdue file. So because the year is 2019, we see these two p tags. One saying wait, is it the past? And the year is 2019. So if you want to change what the p tag says, we can go into our props, say it's not 2019, it's 2020. You change the year. We'll save our file, go back to our web browser, and we see that the top lines are the same, but this line is changed now because we changed the JSX that this state is associated with. It is instead the fall of 2020. That's kind of how you can change the layout of a page using JSX. That's the preview. Now we're looking at Boilermaker. This is the second component I wrote. Again, it looks not too bad, but there are a few things I want to note here. Again, the first thing is the this.state. If you go back to app.js, Boilermakers has 0 props. So we don't use the props variable at all for anything. This.state, we say our mascot is Purdue Pete, the sport we're playing is football, and the number of wins our team has is 0. Ignore line 8. We'll cover line 8 after this. It's kind of next, but just know we need line 8 to work properly. Also ignore what this doesn't just say. We'll come back to that. So in the render function, we have our constant JSX. We have a p tag. Our mascot is the state, this.state. Again, we're talking about the class states, dot mascot, which is Purdue Pete. And we love to watch the state, sport, which in this case is football. Our second p tag, or actually it's the h1 header tag, is we have one, this.state, the number of games stored in the state variable, which is 0 in this case. We also have a button called win that when you click on it, will call this.winGame. Again, if you remember, onClick is how we tell our buttons to do something. Usually always a JavaScript function, maybe like in week 2. Now we can make our JSX more interactive, actually change, kind of like how we did with JavaScript. So we say onClick this.win, and this refers to the function winGame. You can kind of see up here. And this says, it says this.setState. Again, we can use setState to change the state. Never, ever, ever try to change the state by yourself. if you can, always please use this.setState. It is safer and much more like how you would in an actual ReactJS industry project. So we say in parentheses, we put the curly braces again. We still need the curly braces. So actually I can put an enter here to make it a little more legible for everybody. Whoops, my bad. Number of wins is, again, the same number of wins here. We're modifying the number of wins. And we're saying that it is this.state.number of wins to get the current number of wins, then add 1. So if you're kind of think of this like an equal sign, it's essentially saying in the state, set the number of wins variable equal to the current number of wins plus 1. You can make this be whatever you want. It can be a complex statement. It can be simple like this and be complex. It can be even like a constant value. As long as you follow this format, we say this.state, and then in parentheses and in curly braces, the name of the variable you want to add or modify, a colon, and then the data you want to store. In this case, it's adding 1 to the number of wins. You will be good to go. So we'll go back to our code. And you see a button, win, watch, and it'll change the number of games we have won in the H1 tag above us by 1 every single time you press this button. 1, 2, all the way up to as many as you want to. Now, because this is state, and state is based on a per component. Each component modifies its own state, and nothing else can see or change that. If we were to refresh the page or visit it from a different computer, it would say 0 games. No, 0 games. If you look, everything else stays the same, right? The date stays the same, the week, the software, only the number of games change. That is because since properties are defined in the code, props are inherently always going to be the same from page load to page load. State, it can be changed on the fly by the code, however, will always be different depending upon the computer, depending upon the user, everything. So while the code might default to 0, the initial state might be 0, the actual state number of wins will change depending upon who's looking at the code. For example, we'll win some more games here. If I refresh again, it goes back to 0. Remember, state will always be deleted, if you think of it, or will never exist if you refresh the page or if you look at the code from a different computer. Are there any questions so far about state? Okay, I do not see any at the moment. So we're going to jump into our second to last checkpoint for today. All right, here we go. Let me just swap these over really quick. Okay, so that was checkpoints. That was the checkpoint. So yeah, I hope everyone had a chance to get working the checkpoints. We have one quick thing to cover, like 2 slides, so we'll go back to breakout rooms, go over this, and if you have no other questions, you guys can head out for the day. Okay, so adding some user interactivity. So I briefly showed off how you can make your page more interactive in the buttons, right? But you also have to be a little bit careful. There's one line I said to ignore, but we'll get into why we need to ignore that in a second. Because ReactJS has to use some tricks to create an on-click function. So if you guys remember, on-clicks can be used to basically create buttons or other objects that we clicked on that can do something in your code. You need 2 things to define an on-click function. You need a function to do things after the click, obviously, and then you also need what's called a callback binder. So what's a callback binder? A callback binder is a complicated way of saying that ReactJS does not, quote unquote, bind this keyword by default. So if you've ever used like a class-based programming language before, you've probably used like this or self if you're in Python before. But that's not defined in React by default. I'm not 100% sure why, but it is. So to fix that, all we have to do is add a single line to your constructor. You see at the bottom there, you would just replace the bracketed function with the name of your function. So this dot function equals this dot function dot bind in parentheses this. So let me show it off really quick what happens. So we'll pull up VS Code. I'm going to show off in the Boilermaker file. I have this function here, winGame, that basically does the this.setState, and I click a button, the on click down here. Now, to look at line 8, I have to say this.winGame equals this.winGame.bind this. So right now the code works perfectly fine if we show it off, Yay, it works really well. But if we instead comment out the binding thing we see here, we go back to our code, you'll see it causes an error. Whoops. And tells me that this is undefined. So to define this, because React doesn't do it for us automatically, go figure, we have to add this line to our code. This.winGame equals this.winGame.bind. Of course, change the winGame here and the winGame here to match the name of your function, whatever you may call it in your code. So now if you uncomment the line, now the code works again just like normal. So again, super basic, just keep that in mind. You might get some errors if it comes up. Now this is our last thing we have today, time for some breakout room stuff after this. But first, our checkpoint. So the checkpoint you will be just going over is trying to add some user functionality to your React components. It can be a button or whatever you want it to be. Here's a little fun fact. Any HTML element, not just buttons, can have an on-click function. This means you can have text like links, you can have stuff like p tags, divs, h1 tags, you name it. And all of them can have on-click functions. So if you want to make your website a little bit fancier, see if you can add an on-click to something else. And then before everyone goes, thank you for listening before we head to breakout rooms. Again, if you have any feedback for us anonymously, please provide it at the link you see on your screen. We do read this form after every session to see what we can improve upon. Thank you for those who have submitted feedback. Please submit some more if you have any more feedback. And if you have any questions, ask us in your breakout room or on Slack. And we have open review hours every Thursday from 6 to 7. The link being posted on Slack. So as a reminder, here's your checkpoints. Thank you for listening. And yeah, it's in the recordings.